My voice reaching you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically, very happy to be with you. And Kolhapur, as Prasanna has mentioned, has got special place in my heart. I have spent my formative years of my life, the period which was most enjoyable. And I still remember that period, the Kolhapur and old Varnanagar, and my coming to Kolhapur on weekends, spending time there, the Panchaganga also, and everything. So happy to be there with you. And also, I thank you for coming to this. I had to take it on Zoom, though I would have much loved to come to Kolhapur to give this lecture. But still we are there, and we know this is COVID times. We have to take lots of precautions. We are taking lots of precautions. And similarly, the newborns that will be born this year will be special newborns. As pediatricians and neonatologists, you are taking care of them by looking after their feeding, breastfeeding, the immunization, all their health problems. One thing which is also protective newborn program, which is not being implemented on universal scale in our country, is newborn screening. And today the genome is unraveled. So how we have included genetic newborn screening that I will be talking about. I hope that after this lecture, many of you will start practicing newborn screening as has been prescribed by many developed countries as well as many developing countries too now. So basically, I'll promise you that I will not be talking very complicated terms of genetics, genes and all those mutations and everything, but it will be a simple lecture. It will clear all your ideas regarding newborn screening. And I also talk about how you can implement in your practice so that your patients are benefited by the protection this program gives. So let's start with some stories. Now the stories are interesting, and I'm purposefully telling you these stories because these tell you about regarding the clinical observations. So research does not require lot of lab work, lot of complicated, lot of elaborate things, but simple observation can also lead to lots of new findings. So first, the Archibald Garrett. So he was is named as the father of inborn errors of metabolism because he discovered alkaptonuria. How he discovered alkaptonuria? Because he found that a mother was having a baby whose diaper used to turn black when it was kept for drying. And the same mother, after 3 years, she delivered a similar baby with similar black color to the baby's diapers. This baby's diapers turned black after 3 days of life. So he observed that this must be something biochemical. This must be something that is occurring after some time after birth. And this must be some error of inborn errors of metabolism. So he coined that term. He also went on to discover 3 more diseases. And that is why the story of newborn screening, can you say, began with him. Next comes the next scientist, that is Esbon Falling. So he was brought 2 children, one 1.5 years old and other 3 years old. The children were quite all right at birth. Mother actually brought the children to Falling because they smelled very bad. The foul smell was there. Falling noted that urine of these children was smelling very bad. And this was because of the musty odor that is there to PKU urine. So Falling discovered that this particular smell was because of the chemical that is phenylpyruvic acid that is present in phenylketonuria children. And that is how the discovery of phenylketonuria and error amino acidopathy was made. The real story, can you say, began with Robert Guthrie. And I'm purposefully going to speak spend some time on this because this will give you the idea how newborn screening was conceived and how it is practiced. He is very rightfully called the father of newborn screening. Now he was personally affected because his niece had mental retardation and she was diagnosed with PKU in 1960s. So she was diagnosed at the age of 1.5 years. At that time, because of Falling, the test for PKU was there. It was the diaper test for PKU where urine was tested for and phenylpyruvic acid was tested and it was diagnosed. Treatment was also possible for PKU because phenylalanine deficient diets were also there. These were instituted, started in Dr. Guthrie's niece, but her mentation did not improve. He thought about this and he rightfully deduced that this must be because the treatment is started when the important development of brain has been finished. So that is why the PKU, the derivatives are causing damage to brain, and even right treatment is not making any improvements in the patient. So then, being a microbiologist, he devised the bacterial inhibition test. Now this is a plate you can see here, which is deficient in phenylalanine. So whenever, now these are the discs that you can see here, and these discs have got different concentrations of phenylalanine. These are the control discs for comparison. Well, these discs that you can see here, these are actually punched out from this special filter paper on which has the blood sample of the patient is kept. And this disc, you can see this particular disc has got bacterial growth around it. That is because it contains higher concentration of phenylalanine. Similarly, this disc has got 2 mg%, this disc has got 4 mg%. This disc and this concentrated growth around that is similar. So this is about 6 to 8 mg%. So that is how he could pick up the PKU cases from newborn samples. Important thing is here from newborn samples. While his niece was diagnosed at 1.5 years, he could pick up cases from newborn samples. Now you can see that there are lots of discs are there. So simple medium could actually give results to say 50 samples or so. This was a very cheap test and it was accepted by law to be run in the New York State. Later, many states started applying it, and then came the era of newborn screening. So it was started in 1960s. He also discovered bacterial inhibition tests for galactosemia, for MSUD. Later on came the turn of hypothyroidism. So in the 1980s, the bacterial inhibition tests were shifted onto the ELISAs because ELISA is a more accurate method. Also, it can be applied on a larger scale because number of samples were more countries also started adopting this particular program. So automation was there. Next exciting development occurred in 2000. You must be sending some of your newborn samples to tandem mass spectroscopy or MSMS, that is mass spectroscopy, which is done twice for separation and analysis of the molecules. So this was started in 2000. And this is a very good method because it can give analysis of more than 50 disorders from a simple spot in a very short period of time. It's a very sensitive test. So it occurred in 2000. And this is then the screening which was done with the basic test and tandem mass spectroscopy used to be known as expanded screening, just like our expanded program of immunization, because more number of tests were there, it was called expanded screening. And then people started looking forward to genetic screening, when we can detect genetic disorders right from newborn samples. So that was DNA-based screening. Now it is a reality after the Human Genome Project is there, but it is not applied on a wide scale because of many ethical and moral issues, as well as for many disorders, the treatment is not present. So I'll be not talking about this, but I will definitely like to talk about where actually we stand as far as newborn screening is concerned. Now I told you newborn screening is being practiced worldwide. Developed countries have it as a very important program in their public health programs. Many developing countries, even countries like Thailand, Philippines have started it. Many institutions in our country have started on their own through their private enterprise. Now many states are taking it up, but there is no universal screening program as such in our country for newborn screening, as is there in many countries. And most of the screening that is being done is on the individual basis. For sensing this, ICMR instituted a pilot project some years back. Results of this project are out. And the project says that most of the screening disorders for which newborn screening is there are quite common in our country. Now there is a window available through which we can have this particular program nationwide in our country through Rashtriya Bal Suraksha Karyakram, because one of the aims of Rashtriya Bal Suraksha Karyakram is screening for disabilities and diseases. So we can have it if the government has the will. But now so far, as we are concerned, it has to be through the state enterprises or the private practitioners like us. State government of Maharashtra also has started a pilot project, but it has not reached the grassroots as yet. So why are we lagging so far in such an important program? When I think about this, I feel that it must be because of certain misconceptions. There are lots of misconceptions regarding the screening process. So we confuse, or many of the pediatricians in the past used to confuse between diagnosis and screening. Also, we do not consider genetic disorders a priority because right from our young days, our undergraduate days, postgraduate days, we have been taught that we should be thinking about common disorders and not rare disorders. Now, that is true. Genetic disorders that we consider consider individually, many of them are rare disorders. But some genetic disorders, especially as we are going to see in newborn screening lecture, are quite common in our country. Secondly, one other misconception is that we consider them to be untreatable. Now, this is not so. Many of the disorders have very good and cheap and very effective treatment, as we'll be seeing later. So let us start at the beginning. Let us remove that confusion regarding screening and diagnosis. So what is screening? So screening is search for unrecognized disease by means of a rapidly applied test. Now, the important word in this definition is unrecognized disease. So screening is used to detect disease at a very early stage, even before the symptoms have appeared. But what is the corollary of this? What it means that screening is an effort to detect disease in apparently healthy individuals. Though they have the disease, they will not perceive it because they do not have any symptoms. So our routine practice, where we resort to diagnosis, is different from our screening practice. So in the routine practice, what happens is that patient develops symptoms and the diagnosis is made at a later stage, as we have seen in the definition of screening. And the patient is going to come to you with his complaints, or the child is going to be brought to you for its complaints. So the diagnosis is being sought by the patient or the parents. In case of screening, what we have seen is that we aim to diagnose disease before symptoms appear. So the diagnosis is going to be at an early stage. But how will anybody know that he has disease before symptoms are there? That is why, in case of screening, we aim to screen each and everybody in the target population. So that is the difference between diagnosis and screening. Now, some questions are but natural. They will be just now coming to your mind. So is it really necessary? Is it really necessary to have cost for screening, or whether it is a fancy program? Why detect disease in asymptomatic stage by screening anybody? Why not wait till symptoms appear and subject only those babies for investigative tests? It will be a cheaper thing. It will be a very effective thing also. That must be the natural thoughts that may come to your mind. Now, when we think about this, these particular considerations have been very carefully thought about before diseases are chosen for screening. And this particular criteria are known as Wilson and Hübner criteria. Now, we have seen that newborn screening was introduced in 1960s, and these criteria have been devised for screening programs only. They have been in existence in 1968, and they've been accepted by the World Health Organization. Now, this criteria not only consider the disease, the characteristics, but they also deal with the particular test that we are going to employ. They consider the characteristics of the population, as well as they have a study regarding the cost effectiveness of that particular screening program, that particular test for that particular disease in the target population. So all this is very carefully considered before a screening program is devised and started. So let us in short see the important things. So the important considerations regarding a screening program or screening when it is to be started is whether we should institute a screening program only against the disorders which are common in that particular population. So if you are going to look for a very rare disorder, then you're going to spend a lot of money for nothing. So that is why you should have a screening program for common disorders only. Second thing, you should not look for very simple disorder. You should look for those disorders which have got either mortality or considerable mortality. So that is why if such a thing is there, then your screening program is going to be cost effective. Similarly, what we do after diagnosing the disease, you should have effective treatment that is available to you, which you can start the patients on, and then the patient will be doing well with your treatment. As we have seen that screening, we have intended to detect the disease at an asymptomatic stage before symptoms appear. So if a condition has such an asymptomatic stage, it helps greatly to have a screening program against it. Most importantly, outcome when the treatment is started in asymptomatic stage should be considerably better. So it should be significantly better than when it is started when symptoms have appeared. So all these criteria, all these questions should be answered satisfactorily before a disease is chosen, before a test is chosen. So now you will know that in newborn screening, we are going to diagnose treatable disorders. And those treatable disorders we are going to diagnose at asymptomatic stage. So newborn screening aims at earliest possible recognition of disease so that it can prevent most serious consequences, because when the disease is diagnosed at early stage and treatment is started, the prognosis is going to be much better than when the symptoms appear. So that is what is newborn screening in short. Now the disorders for which screening is possible in newborn period are grouped into these two main groups. Basic disorders. So basic disorders are the actual disorders before the NMR spectroscopy or gas chromatography was there, before the expanded screening was there. So these are the disorders. You can group them into endocrinopathies like congenital hypothyroidism or adrenal hyperplasia, or aminoacidopathies like phenylketonuria, or metabolic disorders like galactosemia, or hematological disorders like G6PD deficiency. Now, these basic disorders, depending on which term you are going to screen for, this test, the screening is called NBS3, where only 3D analytes are going to be studied, NBS4, where 4 analytes are going to be studied, and expanded screening. Either it can be with TMS or tandem mass spectroscopy on a blood spot, or GCMS on a urine spot. So where a TMS can give you results regarding more than 50 analytes, or GCMS can give you results regarding more than 400 disorders. So this is what is screening in short. So for all these disorders, screening is possible. You can also group them into these two main groups. With presentation in one period, they may come to you in a very serious state, just like a septic child. For example, child salt losing variety may come to you in shock, or MSUD may come to you like sepsis. Biotinidis again may have some deficiency, may have some skin lesions, but essentially may come with like encephalopathy, or galactosemia masquerade just as a maybe having a serious liver ailment, or your icterus becoming serious, or those coming insidiously in later period in life with mental retardation, for example, our hypothyroidism, or rising congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or PKU, just as we have seen in Dr. Bhutri's niece. In all these disorders, at the time of birth, the newborn is going to be looking normal. Even a specialist neonatologist like Amol will not be able to tell a normal newborn from a newborn which is having a disorder. I will also like to mention here that for certain clinical conditions also, newborn screening should be practiced, and this is the hearing screening as well as critical congenital heart screening, because these are also detectable, and when detected, they can have better prognosis when detected and treated in newborn's period. So let us see regarding newborn screening, how and which countries are studying which disorders they are looking for in their newborns. So USA probably is the country where the most number of disorders are being there in newborn screening programs. So they have 29 or 30 core disorders, and they are being prescribed by their College of Medical Genetics along with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they're run in a statewide manner. They also have some special disorders also as per according to particular state, but core program contains 31 disorders. The NHS in UK is little conservative. It has got 9 programs in its newborn screening program. European Union countries, most of the countries screen for congenital hypothyroidism and PKU. They have been recommended to screen for these disorders of the CH, CF, because it is quite common over there, and hemoglobinopathies they screen for in migrants. In China also, certain disorders are mandatory, while other disorders are discretionary. As I told you, developing countries like Brazil, Philippines, Thailand, each country has their own programs. And it is important to note here that every country has chosen its set of disorders, considering the incidence with which they occur in that particular country, as well as the priorities and the resources that they have. So every country has actually tailored their programs on this particular criteria. In our country, it's supposed to be the most advanced as far as medicine is concerned. And there they have a very good program which is running there for the last 4 or 5 years. And there they have a central lab, and hospitals with more number of deliveries they have chosen. And this set the samples on a dry blood spot for this particular disorder, hypothyroidism, CAH, PKU, and G6PD. And they have so far screened more than 1 lakh newborns. Now, the model that they have adopted here is a central lab where the samples are being sent. So this model can be adopted for one lab by anywhere in the country, because of driverless spots, driverless sampling that I am going to discuss later is very convenient method of transporting the samples. So now let us come to disorders for which newborn screening is practical and should be there in India. So which disorder which must choose and why we should choose that. So we discussed, let us study why we should screen for congenital hypothyroidism in upper newborns. The first question that we must ask ourselves, is the disorder common? Now, the world incidence, everybody agrees, is around 1 in 3,000. The initial studies from India by Meena Desai from Mumbai thought that the incidence is same in our country, around 1 in 2,600. But the later reports said, for example, this particular report is from Hyderabad by Radha Ramadevi, and it says that the frequency of congenital hypothyroidism in our newborns is 1 in 1,700. So this is it is more frequent in our country as compared to the rest of the world. ICMR says that in Chennai, though it is near the sea coast, the incidence in newborns in 1 in 900 is quite common. Mumbai incidence is around 1 in 1,500, while all incidence according to ICMR is 1 in 1,130. So it is thrice as common as the rest of the world. So every 20 minutes or every 15 minutes, a hypothyroid child is being born in our country. Now, why it is important to screen early? Because even in a athyrotic infant, even when thyroid gland is not present, some maternal thyroxine crosses over to the fetal side, and this thyroxine is very efficiently utilized by the fetal brain for its development. So till the time of birth, the baby's brain growth, brain development is protected, even in a athyrotic infant. But after birth, this maternal thyroxine supply is going to stop unless we step in with our newborn screening program. Approximation is there which says that loss of 5 IQ points is there for each week's delay in treatment. So if we delay the treatment, this is very easily treatable disorder, very cheap treatment. So less than 10 paisa or 20 paisa per day, and the child will be all right. Unless we have a screening program, this is the situation which occurs. This is the study from Canada, Quebec province, and you can see when the treatment is delayed till 6 months of age, resultant IQ is half of the actual IQ. When the treatment is delayed till 3 months of age, it's 3/4 only. And it has many studies have shown that when the treatment is started early in the newborn period, IQ of the child matches that of its youth thyroid, that is the SIB, which has a normal thyroid. So that is why we must have a screening program. Now what happens? When are we diagnosing our hypothyroids in absence of screening program? Now this study is not from any peripheral district or in a peripheral taluk or city, but this study is from our capital, Delhi. And this is not a very old study, but this is from 2012. What does it say? That the mean age of presentation, if we do not have a screening program, is 3 years of age, very late. So by this time, the child will have a very bad IQ, bad outcome also even after starting treatment. So that is why we must have a screening program. So we must not diagnose hypothyroidism at this 8 years old child, not even in a 4-month-old child with this prolonged icterus, and you can see the coarseness of the features there, umbilical hernia also, all the features of hypothyroidism present in this child. But we must aim and diagnose hypothyroidism in this bright newborn at 7 days of age and institute treatment at this age only, so that the child can have a bright future. Let us come to the next endocrinopathy, that is congenital adrenal hyperplasia. World incidence is around 1 in 10,000. People were thinking that is more common in India. So in previous studies, it was reported to be 4 times as common. The ICMR pilot project, which was there all over India, it says that the incidence is twice as common as the rest of the world, around 1 in 1,570. So we know that there are 2 varieties, and salt loser may come to your NICUs in a shock-like state, in a baby which has a lot of vomiting and prostration, hypotension. And in older children, the girls will come with ambiguous genitalia. We are missing diagnosis of CH in boys. You can see here. Now, this is an autosomal recessive disorder, which means that the percentage of boys should be equal to that of the percentage of the girls. But in girls are fortunate because the diagnosis is early and is made in them because the clinical pointer in them is because of the virilization of the external genitalia. So we'll see here, this is a study from the northeast of India, where the salt losing variety is being diagnosed at 6 months of age. age of present age of simple virilizers, as you can see here, is 9 years of age, and majority were girls, so a missing diagnosis in boys. Now again, this is a study from AIIMS, from Marumedi et al. In North India, 80% were simple virilizing. So if you just look at Nelson, the percentage of salt losing variety should be more than that of the simple virilizing variety. Again here, the majority that were diagnosed were girls. So in India, in absence of screening program, we are missing diagnosis of CAH, especially in salt losing variety in neonates as well as in males. Now screening will avoid neonatal deaths. Again here, the treatment is easy, treatment is cheap. You can have this treatment even if before the diagnosis in asymptomatic children, and the neonatal catastrophes will be avoided. Now, one interesting disorder, everybody has ambition of diagnosing galactosemia. World incidence is variable, exact incidence in the world is not known. We still do not know what is the incidence of galactosemia in India. At our labs in Pune as well as in Chennai, we keep on encountering this quite frequently. Now, we know galactosemia is because of inability to metabolize galactose, a part of our milk sugar lactose, and it is deleterious to the liver, brain, lens of the eye, kidneys, and many organs. So whenever this galactose is high, because of constant damage, the symptoms are there like icterus, hemorrhagic diathesis, maybe because of the liver affection, conversion because of the CNS affection, and classically we treat in textbooks, E. coli sepsis is supposed to be quite common in galactosemia. Now the children are asymptomatic at birth, and these symptoms will appear only when organ damage is there. So if you are going to diagnose galactosemia in a child who is having symptoms, then this organ damage may not be reversible. So that is why we must have a screening program, and galactose-free diet, simple treatment may lead to near normal life. One hematological disorders are taken, that is G6PD deficiency. Just to brush up your knowledge, it is an important enzyme in the hexose monophosphate shunt. It maintains the glucose RBC stability by maintaining glutathione in the reduced state. Usually it is not manifestation. Some rare individuals where it may result into chronic non-spherocytic anemia. But in newborn, neonatal jaundice with G6PD deficiency may be prolonged and exaggerated also. So with certain drugs, as we know, mostly antimalarials or sulfa drugs, which are no more used, or even infections also may precipitate episodes of hemolysis. It is quite common in our country. So in Maharashtra, we find that the incidence of G6PD deficiency around 4 to 5%. In Parsis, it is very common in Mumbai and around Mumbai. In scheduled caste, it is supposed to be common. In north of India, it is quite common in certain communities. So we may avoid exaggerated neonatal jaundice, or we'll know the diagnosis why it is getting exaggerated if we have a newborn screening program. So how should we approach newborn screening in India? After taking these examples, we'll just see. Now we know our resources are limited. We may have higher incidence because of certain our social practices like consanguinity, other things. I think in and around north of Karnataka, consanguinity is quite common. Some of it may be common in Kolhapur also. So for which disorder we should have universal screening by employing our meager resources, and for which disorders we can have high risk or symptomatic approach. Now this particular thing is very well evaluated, and NNF, our National Neonatology Forum, has prescribed these practice guidelines. And what does NNF says is that it agrees that there should be universal newborn screening program. What NNF says that it should be introduced in phased manner. So by phased manner, NNF means that there should be 3 tiers for newborn screening program in our country. Importantly, what it says is that it should be done after 2 days of life. And that is because it says if it is screened early, then they should be rescreened. So it is better that we screen them after 2 days of life so as to have less false positive and less false negatives. Now, NNF says that universal screening should be there for these disorders. Which are these disorders? Congenital hypothyroidism, we have seen it is quite common in our country. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, again, it is quite common in our country, and G6PD deficiency. So there should be universal screening for all Indian newborns. Group B they have made for expanded newborn screening program, where the resources are not very rich, the affluent population is not there. We should ask the couple, ask the mother of this history. So first, whether any previous children are there for the couple with unexplained mental retardation. Unexplained, word here important is unexplained. You will not screen for a Down syndrome, previous Down syndrome child with expanded newborn screening. Seizure disorder, intractable seizure disorder, if it is there, then you should have an expanded screening program in the newborn only. Previous unexplained SIDS, sibling deaths with features suggestive of IEM, all critically ill units. Now they have specified this. So all critically ill units, we should have an expanded newborn screening program. And lastly, newborn who are showing symptoms of IEM or consanguinity is present, we should have expanded screening program. Where the resources are reached, sometimes parents may be asking you whether I would like to do anything for this child. Whatever test you want to do, you do. In such affluent surroundings, you may have a newborn screening expanded in an expanded manner with TMS, provided a good TMS laboratory is available to you. So there you can have a expanded screening for all such children. So these are the 3 tiers that has been prescribed by NNF. Now we'll see how, when we should screen the babies. We'll discuss this how when part. So we can have newborn screening on cord blood, but this is not a very desirable. We are discussing that the NNF does not agree with this. Hill prick can be done on day 3 or day 4. So this is actually the most ideal way, because here you will be screening every newborn before baby is being discharged from the nursing home. Other choice is follow blood, but here, though the baby may be little bigger, all babies may not come to you. So maybe a lot of babies. So for universal screening, we can have Hill prick after day 3 or 4. This is ideal. Why this is ideal? Because by this time, the babies have been put on feed. They may be at the top feed, or mostly it is breastfeed. So the proteins are there and lactose is there. So there'll be less false negatives. Less false negatives because the insult will be there. If this is there, then the metabolites for this particular diseases will be there more, and false negatives will not be there on day 3 or day 4. Birth is a very topsy-turvy event for newborn physiology. So that is why lots of changes are taking place. For example, TSH is very high in the cord blood or in first 24 hours of life, because the newborn is getting adjusted to extrauterine environment. So if you screen in first 24 hours, lots of false positives will be there for hypothyroidism. So that is why it is better to screen on day 3 or day 4. What sort of sample that you must have? Now we need not have an IV sample, but it can be a Hill prick sample. Now you're pediatricians and neonatologists, so you know Hill prick. For a trained person, it is quite easy. It is also less painful. Now disposable autolates are available, which give a measured prick, and a good sample can be there. Now this sample is blotted onto this particular filter paper, which is a very special character of filter paper. The pore size as well as thickness of the filter paper is very regulated. So when we punch out an area from this particular circle, what we get is a very measured sample from which the analyte can be measured accurately. So the blood samples are taken onto these particular circles of the filter paper. They are dried on a horizontal plane, and then they're put into an envelope and they can be sent to the central laboratory. Now it's very easy to transport also. So it can be collected by anybody. IV sampling is not required, easily transported. And this particular sample is known as dry blood sample. So dry blood sample, this again was devised by Guthrie. So the technology that we use and that is being used in most of the world is fluorimetry, because it's quite accurate, and expanded screening is done by the means of TMS, tandem mass spectroscopy, or MSMS. The expanded screening on urine can be again on a filter, dried sample on the filter paper. And the time, as I said, should be after day 3 of life. Now, how does a newborn screening program is run? First of all, newborn is there from which you get the sample. A screening test is employed, and then you will get a large number of screen negative newborns and a small number of screen positive newborns. The screen positive newborns, you call them back, have a confirmatory test on them. So you don't treat directly from a screen positive unless some other criteria are there, but you have a confirmatory test by recalling these newborns. And this screen positive, again, you differentiate into those with normal results on confirmatory test and the large number that is on screen positive for the affected. So you rule out false positives also by having a confirmatory test. Now, this will record takes time. and it's possible that recall may miss some babies. So that is why at my lab, what we are doing is which is known as the reflex genetic testing. What does reflex means? Reflex means when we have a positive sample, that is screen positive sample, then we, on the same sample, on the same blood spot, we carry out a test by which we know that is whether it is true negative or false, true positive or false positive. So for example, for hemoglobinopathies, we do complete gene sequencing from the entire blood spot. If it is positive for cystic fibrosis, then we do targeted analysis because most of the mutation for cystic fibrosis are these two exons. We do a targeted gene sequencing for CFTR gene. G6PD, we do complete gene sequencing. For galactosemia, we do complete gene sequencing again by conventional Sanger method. For CH, now here, the deletion duplications are common. So we do first MLPA. If the mutation is not there in MLPA, we do a complete gene sequencing by Sanger. Or if the sample is screen positive for CH. For PKU, we double check with the means of TMS. If the phenyltyrosine ratio is suggestive of phenylketonuria, then we do phenylalanine hydroxylase gene sequencing by NGS. Biotinidase is again complete gene sequencing. Congenital hypothyroidism, we don't do gene sequencing because the genes are not important here. For a repeat sample, we do T4 and TSH testing. So this is, now this particular report I'm sharing with you just to stress how it is done and reflex testing is done, how quick it can be. So here you can see that this particular newborn, the sample reached us on 17th of December last year, and it was reported to be biotinidase positive on 18th of December. So in one day, it was reported to be biotinidase positive. The same sample my lab took up for sequencing, and the mutation, actual pathogenic mutation, you can see here, was reported on the 5th day the sample reached us. 17th, 20th is actually the 5th day, 21st. So on the 5th day, the sample was reported with the mutation. Important thing is with the mutation. So the diagnosis was confirmed. Now here, the doctor actually was rather not believing us because the baby did not have any symptoms. This was a pre-symptomatic diagnosis. So he recalled the baby and sent us the repeat sample. Now repeat sample reached us on 25th of December. So note here that the first initial detection was made on 18th of December. Sample reached here, the repeat sample reached on 25th of December. But before on that, the molecular diagnosis was there on 21st of December. So the recall sample was reported on 26th of December. So that is why genetic screening, reflex screening is time saving. Also, there is less confusion. You can have a quicker diagnosis. And importantly, this particular couple, because this molecular diagnosis is there, can have prenatal diagnosis in their future pregnancies. So that is the power of genetic reflex screening. Now screening, as you can see here, does not mean the screening test only. So screening program actually includes sample collection, screening test, identifying the screen positives, follow-up and repeat confirmation test, identify borderline and affected, treatment and follow-up. This is very important, and periodic monitoring is required. So every step of this particular program is important to screening program. At LifeCell, we are evaluating each and every step of this program because we have the quality control with us, with CDC Atlanta, as well as our NABL, as well as we have a CAP program, that is College of American Pathologists program. So we are accredited with all these authorities. Now I'll just talk about a little bit about the milestones that LifeCell that we had. So the newborn screening was started in 2012 in LifeCell, and we are the first commercial lab to give reports on GCMS platform. In 2016, even before ICMR, we are screened more than 1 lakh babies. In 2019, this big number has reached 2.5 lakh babies. I'm confident that by 2021, because we are screening almost more than 10,000 babies every month, there'll be 5 lakh babies reports ready, data will be ready with us by year 2021. Equipments also, we are the only one in private setup that we are having Orthodelphia, the Panther Puncher, and the LC-MS platform. So let us come to the topic and the main reason why newborn screening, neonatal screening is relevant to us. Now, as pediatricians, you will agree that no case of poliomyelitis is there in our country for so many years now. Many of you will not have seen diphtheria or tetanus in our country for many years. But this year, 2020, more than 20,000 hypothyroidists will be born, an eminently treatable cause of mental retardation. More than 5,000 congenital adrenal hyperplasias may be born. The newborn that you are seeing in your routine neonatal visits to gynecologists may be having these disorders, or some of the newborns in your NICUs may be having these disorders, because few thousand metabolic disorder patients will be born in 2020. So if you have newborn screening program in place, like this American baby is thanking Dr. Guthrie because that baby has PKU, but it is living normally, having full joy of the life because it had newborn screening. So similarly, the newborns in your country that you will detect and treat will be thanking you, doctor. Thank you, doctor, for newborn screening. So that is the end of my lecture.
Thank you, sir. It was very informative lecture, sir. And we can take the question answer sessions now. But I had some few doubts, sir, here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
So now, sir, you mentioned about a good TMS laboratory. So
sorry to interrupt you, Amol.
Yeah.
Sir, तुमचं screen sharing बंद करा.
Okay, चलो.
You can continue now, Amol. No.
Okay, sir. So you mentioned about a good TMS laboratory, sir. Like, so what is this? I didn't.
So a good TMS laboratory means laboratory which is then doing a large number of samples. So that is first criteria. Second thing is that it should have good accreditations, like I told you. So it must be participating in quality control programs. Third thing is that it should be giving you a good TAT. That is the turnaround time. So if you give a sample to us at TMS laboratory and it is reporting after say 5 days or 7 days, till that time your newborn will be serious. So that is why a good turnaround time is important. Fourth and most important thing is that it is not just the report that the lab must be giving you. So basically the lab should have a support system where it will be discussing the report with you. So it will be asking you, what are you expecting from this TMS sample if it is a symptomatic baby, discussing the case there with you, and then after then they're having a clinical biochemical correlation and then giving you guidelines. Also, few labs actually test their TMS with follow-up testing with say GCMS. So for example, at LifeCell, what we are doing is that we are testing first with TMS and the analytes, then we are there for those analytes. Most of them can be tested for another analyte, that is the complementary analytes on GCMS. So we are doing that so we can have a surety regarding the clinical report. That are the, in short, the criteria of a good TMS laboratory.
So the one more thing, sir, I just wanted to ask, like this technical problem in getting the good sample.
You mean dry blood spot?
Yeah, dry blood spot, sir. Because heel prick sometimes becomes very difficult, sir.
Yes. So basically, for heel prick, two very simple things that we must observe is that the feet should be warmed up first. So when the feet is warmed up, then the blood circulation peripheral improves. Second thing, as we know, that feet we should not hold up, but we should hold little lower down than the heart level. Third thing is that if we have a good autolate, and that autolate we press up a little bit. If we just hold it against the skin and don't press it, then it does not give a good prick. Many of us are afraid of giving a prick to newborn because we feel that we may harm the baby. So basically, on every dry blood spot cord, you will find that the areas where the prick are without injury are highlighted, shaded. And on those areas, these pricks will not be causing any harm to the newborn. So if you press a little harder against that particular part and then press that autolate, a good sample will be obtained. With good autolate, usually a free-flowing sample is obtained. First spot should be actually discarded and the second spot, then you can get free flowing spot get on the dry blood filter spot. Again, when you're drying this, you should dry it in a horizontal position, not under the fan. So it should dry at room temperature, not with a dryer. Otherwise, caking will take place. You should not apply second spot to this particular spot if the spot is not adequate enough. You feel that it is not adequate enough, because it will cause double layering, and these samples are rejected. So that is why free flowing sample, single spot, and then it is good enough.
So, sir, usually there are we take 3 to 4 spots there. So how much minimum good sample is required? 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. How many? One spot is okay for?
1 or 2 good spots, filling that circle are actually very enough, because from that circle, for our routine test, that is basic test, we can measure 8 analytes. So good spots filling one circle will give our examination for 8 diseases. So 2 spots are more than enough actually. But avoid applying the blood spot to the same spot once again, because that will be double application. That will cause caking. So if you do not feel that the spot is good, take different paper or different circle and then apply the blood spot.
Sir, about this universal screening program, sir. So we are hearing about this program since last 4, 5, 6 years. And even the targeted, like tier 2, targeted babies, like previous babies with some disorder or unexplained death or critically ill babies. So even that, we are not able to get this testing done for these babies. So the awareness part is really missing here. And the thing that we encounter here is that, like, for forget about the tier 2, like, so we'll consider a normal baby who is born, and the status of newborn screening in India is horrible. So even in good cities also, it is very difficult. So
Yes,
what can be done here? Like whether what we feel is that the lacunas are, one thing is awareness, second is the communication problem is there, and the cost. Although it's not for few couples or for few families, it is okay. For when you are trying to implement in this on a mass setup, the cost factor also comes here. So what do you feel, sir, here? What can be done so that the maximum
questions are valid, and it is not only you or you in Kolhapur that are facing problems. Everybody is facing problems. So first of all, the counseling or the information should be given to parents before birth of the child. So it's a teamwork between gynecologist as well as the pediatrician to have a program in the hospital. That is one thing. Second thing is that we have seen here the incidence of hypothyroidism. So the incidence is very high, and this is the treatable cause of mental retardation. The cost for actually estimating this is not very high. So for basic screening, it is of something around, say, 200 or something per disease. So test with 200 per disease is not very bad. Similarly, for your NICU babies who are critically ill, where you do not have a diagnosis, who are worsening even after starting antibiotics or your supportive care, there the cost is, say, something like, say, around 2,000, 3,000, I don't remember exactly. But there, doing it timely is very important. Second thing, counseling also matters. So on pediatrician's side, if we have a sort of information booklet which can be given, information brochure can be shared with parents at the time of birth, or gynecologists can tell the parents, say, in the antenatal visit that is there before birth, that this such a sort of program is there, then it can take place on a universal scale. We find in India that means in Pune, that people who are coming from abroad, they're asking for these tests because they have been, their first child has been screened there. So once you start rolling, then the second children and the program will take up. But here the first block is actually starting the program.
Sir, can we, usually nowadays there is a lot of like vaccination counseling. There are videos on vaccination counseling. So can LifeCell come with some video about this, spreading awareness
Sure,
about
sure.
this? Yeah. So if that can be done, it can be sent on our groups, and we can use this for these videos as a part of counseling, sir.
It's a very
So
good
this,
idea. I think we have some videos. I will post these videos to you.
yeah. So there is one question that is asked by one of our colleagues, that can we apply spirit betadine before the prick for the sample?
You can clean by spirit. There is no problem regarding that. First drop is to be discarded. First drop is to be discarded, and then you can take the second drop.
Okay, sir. So similarly, sir, if we can get a video about this.
If you have problems regarding dry blood spot, then you can also have an IV sample. It does not matter. Heel prick is not mandatory. So you can take a intravenous sample, especially for NICU babies, because already you're pricking the baby for other biochemistry parameters. So you can take that samples also. So heel prick does not have any advantage over intravenous blood in that manner. So that can also be obtained.
So the one more thing, sir, that I was talking about, can we have a video for dry blood, like heel prick sample?
Sure.
How we take it? That will also help, because for the non-sick babies who are electively going for this screening. So one more social question, sir. One more thing. So what can be done as a association, like Kolhapur Association of Pediatricians? What can be done for this newborn screening, sir? Universal, like, or how can LifeCell help here?
I will like to help you, and LifeCell will like to help you in any way we can help you. One thing is by having a, you can say, good price, because if the number of samples are good, then we can pass on that advantage to patient anytime. So the program can take place. Second thing is that the videos and other things that you have said, that is also fine. You can give our genetic counselors numbers if anybody has any difficulty. Post-test counseling, that is when the report is negative, positive, then we are there to support you in actually counseling the patient as well as the family, as well as helping you with treatment.
Okay. Okay. Sir, there is one more question. I'm not able to understand this, but Dr. Nivedita, madam, can you ask this question, madam, by unmuting your video, your audio?
I mean to ask that which transient disorders in the newborn period, which can interfere with the IM test results. Like we have observed transient hyperammonemias or some changes in the organic acid levels. And then later on we come to know that they are probably transient and the baby is not having any IM.
Yes, very good question. So basically, you're meaning transient hyperammonemia, which is a condition which is there with large prematures, especially with some sort of minimal RDS or something. And this ammonia starts rising within first 24 hours. So usually other disorders where I have increased ammonia, like organic acidemias or our urea cycle disorders, the ammonia starts rising after day 3 or day 4 of life when the feeds are there. So that is one essential clinical difference, as well as when we do for this particular children with hyperammonemia, with transient hyperammonemia, the analytes that we get, the metabolites that we get on TMS, they're quite different from those which we get on the transient hyperammonemia of newborn. At the same time, the transient hyperammonemia of newborn should be treated very energetically, very aggressively, because ammonia is extremely harmful to brain. So these particular children, if they have, we treat them properly, they have a very good prognosis, because this never recurs when it is transient. Other transient condition that is there is hypothyroidism. So hypothyroidism can also be transient, but it is said that you should treat it. If it is the TSH levels are high, then you should treat it. So that is the thing. So basically, the two-tier testing is very important to rule out this transient thing, these aberrant things, because biochemistry is affected by so many parameters. For example, if a baby is having sepsis, then the ammonia level may be little higher. and that is not actually your metabolic disorders. So metabolic hyperammonemia, we should call it only when it is more than fourfold of the normal, and it is accompanied by other changes. So that is why we should differentiate between the metabolites we are getting as epiphenomenon of the underlying condition and actual IEM. So where there the expertise of the lab as well as the expertise of the reporting comes up.
Okay. Sir, one more thing, like for some extreme premature babies, they have a long stay, almost 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 3.5 months, 4 months. So testing in the early period, whether it will affect the results, sir, initially coming negative and then come positive. Is it like that?
Yes.
The similar type
Yes,
of question.
So all the endocrine development, all the endocrine axis is developing in a different manner in a premature baby. So that is why it is advised that screening should be done at 2 weeks of life in premature babies. So by that time, so false negatives will not be there if the baby is having endocrinopathy.
Okay, sir. Anyone wants to ask anything else? Like
Amol, I just hello. Good evening, sir.
Yes.
Good evening.
Yeah.
My question is, sir, because now newborn screening, because many of them are preventable things. So what are the legal implications? Like, suppose child comes with and even if we offer and they refuse or we don't do it, like many a times now, as of now, we are not doing all the children, but what is the legal stand? Like, is there any right for the parents to complain against doctor, or that means we take consent for every parent that we offered and they deny for it, like something like that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Now it is being practiced in all metros for prenatal screening. So prenatal screening they do for Down syndrome. So they are advising to each and every patient in antenatal period, the prenatal screening with our double test or triple test. And whenever it is refused, they document it. So far in newborn screening, this has not been done in metros at least. But patients may come to you saying that this was treatable. Why you did not detect it? So far it has not occurred. Presently what has happened is that in certain countries, it is mandatory by law to screen for disorders. For example, in Australia or US or UK, if the newborn is not being screened voluntarily by the parents, then they have to document it that on their own volition, they're not going to screen this newborn. In our country, that is not mandatory, but still it is being taught to you. As pediatricians, as neonatologists, you're being taught this. So you know for a fact that newborn screening is helpful. It is beneficial to patients. So somebody may come up and sue you if at that time what court will say, I cannot say. But I don't think it is mandatory for you to just now take from each and every patient that I don't want to get screened unless you have a universal screening program in your, say, NICU, expanded screening program in your NICU or a gynec nursing home that you visit. If you have a universal screening program and the parents don't want to screen, then you should document it. If it's not present, then you need not document it.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So, any other questions?
Amol, just check that box.
Yeah, there are no other questions, sir. No new questions. So just Uday Patil sir wanted to ask what are the diseases that we are going to screen in Tier 2. So.
Okay. So Dr. Uday Patil, in Tier 2, we have basic newborn screening along with TMS as well as GCMS. So TMS screens for almost 50 disorders, and these consist of fatty acid oxidation disorders, urea cycle disorders, amino acidopathies, as well as it screens, our particular lab screens for SCID also, subacute combined immunodeficiency. So these are the disorders along with basic disorders we screen for in expanded screening.
Okay. Okay, sir. So till now we have comprehensively covered everything, sir. Prasanna sir, over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Gambhir sir. It was very nice talk and covered from starting of genetics, how it is started, and till today. And you have done the very tremendous work. Even we don't know you have reached up to 2.5 lakhs babies here screened. Thank you. My question to you, how can we reduce the charges of these screening charges?
Charges are, we can reduce by referring more babies. So see, any lab which when it does screening, it has got some basic cost. So if the number of samples are more, then this basic cost is shared. So that is how we can reduce charges. And you tell me anytime for Kolhapur, I will do my best to reduce charges.
Okay.
I already told you I got soft corner for Kolhapur in my heart.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Amol, for moderating this session. You are very nicely moderated. Thank you, sir, for nice lecture. We can end up here. No problem.
Yeah, thank you, Prasanna. Thank you, Amol. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Sir.
Thank you.